UFC Vegas 46, Draftkings has released the salary so we can take our first look. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. Welcome back. I'm excited to be back. This is the first look. This is where we go over the slate fighter by fighter, salary by salary, and we talk about spots that we like and spots that we don't like. At the top of the slate at 9,300, we have Giga Chikadze. He's fighting Calvin Kattar, and this is a pretty favorable matchup for Giga. The reason I say it's favorable is because Kattar is looking to strike, normally coming with a boxing-heavy approach and walking in a straight line. That's tailor-made for somebody like Giga Chikadze, who is an absolute sniper on the outside, and we saw that in his last couple of fights. Now, I'll admit, I was one of these guys that wasn't too high on Giga in the beginning. When you look at his fights against Brandon Davis, or you look at his fight against Jamal Emmers, these are split decisions. He didn't look great. And even after that, he fought Irwin Rivera, who was coming up a weight class on short notice, making his UFC debut, and he couldn't even put him away. So I was very, very low on Giga when he was beginning his UFC career. But since these fights, I mean, you take a look, he had these fights that I'm talking about down here, but the fight against Omar Morales, I think that's when people realize, oh, this guy's for real. Quickly disposes of Jamie Simmons, same with Cub Swanson, and then when he beats Edson Barboza in the third round, that puts everybody on notice. And I think we're seeing him earn these finishes recently because he's just becoming a better mixed martial artist, better at MMA striking, mixing that traditional kickboxing with MMA striking and getting it to a point where he's a serious problem in the division. And he doesn't have a whole lot of miles on him, right? He's not getting into these wars typically. So physically, he's going to come into this in great shape, in great condition, and I expect him to actually get the finish here, and it might come a little bit later because Calvin Kattar is tough. But I can see Giga consistently finding a home for that body kick, letting that open up the other parts of his offense and putting it on Calvin at some point. So the pick for me is Giga Chikadze inside the distance, and at 9,300, I think he's a great play. He'll probably be one of the highest owned, if not the highest owned fighter on the slate, but it's for good reason. Gabriel Benitez, he's fighting TJ Brown this week. Money continues to come in on Benitez, which is a little bit surprising to me. Styles make fights, and this is a typical striker versus grappler matchup. And if you watch the channel, you know that we lean toward grappling as often as possible. Now, ideally for Gabriel Benitez, he wants to keep the fight standing, and we know that he has power in his hands, but the problem is that takedown defense. Billy Q in his last fight was able to take him down 3 times before finally knocking him out. And a few years back, Enrique Barzola secured 9 takedowns in one fight on him. So I don't think that the takedown defense is going to be there for him. And at this price tag, that really, really worries me. And the fact that money continues to come in on him makes TJ Brown an even more attractive underdog in my eyes. So the pick for this fight is TJ Brown. We'll talk about him when we get down there. At 9,000, we have Vyacheslav Borshev. He's fighting Dakota Bush, and this is an interesting one because the line has swung massively. Even on Tapology, you see all these rankings for him here that came out of nowhere. If you look, they were all, updated a couple of days ago, right? So there's a lot of hype on the guy for sure, and it seems justified. He picked up a nice win on the Contender Series against Chris Duncan, who's pretty solid. And now he's making his official UFC debut. And to be fair, Dakota Bush didn't look great against Austin Hubbard, but that was later. Early in the fight, in the beginning of the fight, he was on fire. And because of that, I can see him having success, at least in the early rounds of this fight, which makes me feel like Vyacheslav Borshev is a trap. With the way that the line has moved and all the attention that he's getting, I could see him fumbling his UFC debut and screwing over a ton of people on DraftKings and just in the betting world in general. My mind could change later in the week, but as of right now, the pick is Dakota Bush. Borshev looks like a big, juicy trap that a lot of people are going to get caught in. At 8,900, we have Caitlin Chookagian. She's fighting Jennifer Maia this week, and it looks like an awesome spot for Chookagian. She's going to be the better striker, and she's coming in with 5 inches of height, 4 inches of reach. She's already won over Jennifer Maia back in 2019, and I think we see another unanimous decision win for her in this spot. If you look at her recent losses, she has the loss to Jessica Ai by split decision. She has the loss to Valentina Shevchenko, no shame in that. She put her sister in the dirt after. And she has the loss to Jessica Andrade, who punched a hole through her stomach, basically. But outside of that, she's been really solid for a really long time. I will say that she generally doesn't make for a great DraftKings play just because she doesn't post the highest scores. She doesn't normally dominate her fights. She manages her fights. So that is something that kind of keeps me off of her in this spot, but she may come in at low ownership, potentially making her a good leverage play this week. So the pick is Katlyn Chookagian by decision. At 8,800, we have Brandon Royval, and he looks like he's probably going to be top 3 most owned on this slate. And that's probably for good reason. I mean, he's fighting Rodrigo Bontorin. I don't think that Rodrigo Bontorin is going to be able to keep Royval off of him. But also, one reason why I really like Royval is because of how slippery he is during these wrestling scrambles. Scrambled eggs. He's very tricky on the ground and on the feet, and I know that Bontorin is probably going to prefer these grappling exchanges. He'll be more comfortable there, but I don't think that he's going to be able to keep up with Brandon Royval. Royval does have the 2 losses to the 2 best fighters in the division, but I think he's going to be able to get back on track and get to these winning ways, and not only winning fights, but winning them convincingly, finishing them. So Brandon Royval inside the distance, but don't be surprised if it's uber mega chalk this week. Syed Yakub Krakhmanov at 8,700 looks like a lock this week. He's a much younger fighter. He's 9 years younger. He's going to be taller. He's going to have a 5-inch reach advantage, and he can get it done on the feet. He can get it done on the ground. So there are a lot of paths to victory here for him. And I was really impressed with his UFC debut against Trevin Jones. I think we see more of the same this week. It's hard for me to see him putting away Brian Kelleher, but I don't think that it's impossible. Kelleher has lost 6 times as a pro professionally by submission alone, and he's very hittable. I think we see the younger fighter shine in this spot, and I'm going to have a lot of Krakhmanov in my lineup. Brian Kelleher does well against guys like Domingo Pilardi, Ray Rodriguez, Ode Osborne, but that upper level, that next step up, like the Ricky Simones, Cody Stamans, Montel Jacksons, we've seen him struggle with. I think Krakhmanov is closer to that skill level than the former. So give me Krakhmanov this week. Joanderson Brito is 8,600, and he's making his UFC debut. And normally when you see guys that are making their debut from outside the US who have great records and a lot of finishes, they're normally fighting a bunch of cans, but that's not the case with Brito. Outside of the UFC, he's fought some legit competition, and he's been doing it for quite a long time. I have a hard time believing this guy is 26 years old, but if that's the case, then he's been fighting since the age of 17. So him, his coaches, they obviously took their time. I appreciate the approach. I respect the approach, and I think they waited to get to this point when they had a complete fighter, and that's what I think that we'll see. I'm expecting fireworks from him on Saturday against Bill Algeo, who has not looked great in the UFC. When we are building our lineups, we want to target fighters with big grappling advantages, again, as often as possible, and I think that's what we have here. Joanderson Brito looks like he might be the best play of the slate. It's a little scary to say considering that he's making his UFC debut, but at this price, and from what I'm expecting from him, he looks like a fantastic play. So the pick this week is Joanderson Brito inside the distance as well. At 8,500, Jake Collier is in bad shape. He's fighting Chase Sherman, who looks like he's going to be one of the better underdog options on this slate. Collier came into the UFC as a middleweight. Now he weighs in at the heavyweight limit. I can't trust somebody like that unless, of course, they're fighting Jean Vellante. Chase Sherman is a heavyweight who can stand up straight and punch, and I would hope that's all that's required to be able to beat Jake Collier this week. What Collier does have going for him, though, is that Chase Sherman is terrible defensively and does tend to get into firefight. And Collier has shown us that despite the mass, he can still keep a solid pace. But we also saw him basically get one-tapped by Tom Aspinall. So I don't know what's going on with this fight. But what I can tell you is that I would assume more people are going to play Chase Sherman than Jake Collier this week. The pick for me, tentatively, is Chase Sherman, but I'm not confident one way or the other. At 8,300, we have Court McGee. He's fighting Ramiz Brahimaj. I'm telling you this now, there's no way I'm going to pay favorite money for Court McGee. He's 2-5 in his last 7 fights. He's 37 years old. He's got a lot of miles on him, and there's no clear path to victory for him in this spot. When you bet Court McGee, you just hope that his toughness carries him to victory, but I don't see that happening over the fighter who's still stepping into his prime. So the pick for me is Ramiz Brahimaj, and we'll talk about him shortly. At 8,200, we have Vanessa Demopoulos. She's fighting Silvana Gomez-Suarez this week. Both these fighters are 0-1 in the UFC, so the good news, one of them's going to get their first win this week. And I expect the person to get their first win to be Demopoulos. She should be the more willing grappler coming into this fight. And we saw Silvana in her last fight against Lupi Godinez, her grappling looked terrible. You can see on her Tapology page that she's been competing in some grappling contests, and if this fight hits the mat, I think that she's going to have a lot of success. The contests basically tell me that she's honing the best part of her game, and that's going to serve her really well against somebody like Silvana. I also like that she's the younger fighter. She's 33, Silvana's 37, and I know that's not a huge difference, but when it comes to you entering the UFC at that age, I don't think that you're going to be making a whole lot of noise in the division. And if I remember correctly, she was supposed to fight somebody on Dana White's Contender Series, but Sam Hughes pulled out of the fight with Lupi Godinez, thus she stepped in. It's not like the UFC signed her straight away. So the pick for me in this fight is Vanessa Demopoulos by submission. I do expect her to come in at lower ownership too, and at $8,200, that's a fantastic play. And then we start to look at 8,000 and below. You have Gomez-Suarez, who I have no interest in. You've got Ramiz Brahimaj, who, again, he's fighting Court McGee, and like we said earlier, he is the pick this week for this fight. To get somebody at an underdog price fighting Court McGee, I will take that all day long. And money's continuing to come in on Brahimaj. I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up being the favorite by the time the fights start on Saturday. And I actually think that he's a solid prospect in the division. He did lose his UFC debut after getting his ear ripped off, basically, by Max Griffin, but he did bounce back well against Sasha Palatnikov, and I think we see him pick up a submission in this spot as well. Chase Sherman at 7,700. Now, don't get me wrong, Chase Sherman is ass. And I think that when a lot of us look at Chase Sherman, we think of his performance against Ike Villanueva, where he looked pretty good, but that would be like saying I look pretty good on my heavy bag in the corner over there. It's expected. Jay Collier is not UFC caliber, and while the same could be said, I believe, for Chase Sherman, I think physically he does have the tools to get it done this week. Bill Algeo at 7,600, I have no interest. Brian Kelleher at 75, I have no interest. Same with Rodrigo Bontorin and Jennifer Maia. This range, I'm going to be off entirely. But Dakota Bush at 7,200, like we said before, the Borshev play seems like a trap. In MMA DFS, it's all about zigging where other people zag. So I think that this is a really good opportunity for us to take somebody who's a strong grappler, who we know that is probably going to secure at least one takedown. And if he could do anything with those takedowns, Borshev's in trouble, and so is 65% of the field that's going to be playing him. At this price, at this leverage, at this skill set, Dakota Bush is hard to ignore. And I could say the same thing about TJ Brown, who looks like he's going to have a big wrestling advantage in this spot. It's not like Gabriel Benitez is a massive power puncher who's going to take Brown out in the first round. I think that Benitez is going to give up takedowns easily in this fight. We saw TJ Brown secure 7 takedowns. Where is it? 7 takedowns here against Jordan Griffin, and that was inside 2 rounds. 2 rounds. So if he's got that ability and he could be more efficient with his energy, then I think he's going to have a lot of success. I'm thinking 1 to 2 takedowns per round and a decision win makes him a great play at this price. And lastly, at 6,900, you have Calvin Kattar. This is a fantastic stacking option for cash games just because of the type of fight that these guys are going to put on. Both of them throw a lot, land a lot at a pretty decent rate. So I don't expect Kattar to win, but I do expect this to be competitive in spots. So for GPPs, tournaments where you're not playing cash games, I don't recommend trying to take a shot on Calvin Kattar, especially when you have guys like TJ Brown or Dakota Bush there right around the same price who have a better matchup. But that has been the first look. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys coming back. I'm excited for what 2022 has in store for us. As always, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. That way I could bring more of this to you.